Hello again, and welcome back to the final chapter in our Dig Down Deep series exploring the journey of Ruth. Now, at the end of chapter 3, Mike left us in a bit of a cliffhanger. After Ruth and Boaz had made their feelings known for each other, the end is almost in sight, but here there appears to be a few storm clouds that could yet disrupt their plans and affect their love life forever. Now, here in chapter 4, we see this wonderful love story, this great plan of redemption finally coming to an end. Join me as we follow along in our final 3 episodes. Now, today, in episode 1, we're going to see Boaz as he takes some practical steps to win his bride. The first thing he does is he calls together the assembly. Read with me in verses 1 and 2. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Now, the previous chapter had left us at a bit of a dramatic point. Ruth and Boaz were obviously in love and wanted to get married, and this would require Boaz to exercise his rights as a kinsman redeemer. However, as we had seen before in previous chapters, there was a kinsman closer to Ruth, and he had first dibs. He had priority. Because he was a relative who was closer in line, he had to first give up his rights as kinsman redeemer. Now here we are at the beginning of chapter 4 with everyone wondering if he would claim the right of kinsman redeemer towards Ruth and keep her and Boaz from coming together. Now this thought must have been going through Boaz and Ruth's mind, yet they didn't hold back from trying to do the right thing. Often we can be tempted to live life on the sly and try and get away with something by not drawing attention to the situation or to ourselves. Boaz here shows us a different way, a way of doing things with integrity and trusting in God for the outcome. Now, the town gate was a kind of an outdoor court or forum where different important matters relating to the life of the town were discussed and judgments were made. For an ancient city in Israel, it was a combination of what we might see as a city council chamber and a courtroom. So Boaz continues to do the right thing, and he gathers together 10 elders who would be able to witness the decision made. He is ensuring a proper foundation for his new relationship with Ruth, and he doesn't want anyone to come back later and legally challenge the foundation of what had taken place. Now, when I think about the theme of redemption in Ruth, I'm reminded of the steps that Jesus took to fulfill all the requirements of the law with regard to winning me back for himself. Paul also talks about this in Romans 5, verse 1, where he says, "Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ." Ruth and the story of Boaz reminds us that we can be reassured that our relationship with Jesus is secure, built on the right foundation, and nothing can take that away from us. The final character in the story is brought in. This is the other relative, simply known as friend, or as the Hebrew puts it, Mr. So-and-so. We don't need to know his name, just what his decision is going to be. So the stage is set and the negotiations can begin. Read with me in verses 3 to 4 as we see what the story unfolds. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." And with bated breath, everyone holds on for the answer. "I will redeem it," says the relative. Now, this seems like a whole bunch of good news for this relative. According to the Old Testament laws, the promised land could not be given away forever. If you were in financial trouble, you could sell your land, but every 50 years, the land was restored to the original owner. So if you needed to sell, the amount you would get for it would be reduced the closer it got to the 50-year mark. Now, Naomi's dead husband, Elimelech, has already sold the land, and Naomi had no means of buying it back herself. But the kinsman redeemer had the privilege of stepping in and paying off the debt. The land would temporarily become his. He would be free to farm it and make money from it. Once the 50-year period was up, if Naomi had no surviving sons, then the land and all the benefits he could get from it would become permanently his. And then he could pass it on to his own sons as their inheritance. Now, for the relative, this is a no-brainer. He would have been aware of Naomi and Elimelech's situation. It was a small town, after all. And so, almost rubbing his hands in glee at his sudden change in fortune, he says, "Yes, I'll do it." Now, it's almost certain that Ruth and Naomi were watching this all from a hidden place. Their hearts must have sunk when they heard this nearer kinsman say, "I will redeem it." They heard from his own lips that he would exercise his right as kinsman redeemer. And that meant that he would gain not only the property in question, but also marry Ruth instead of Boaz. However, Boaz knew exactly what he was doing, and he had the situation completely under control. Let's read in verses 5 to 8 what happened next. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also require Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. So the apparent bad news is now swiftly followed by the good news. The relative suddenly realizes that this is not a simple property deal. The redemption involves marriage as well. You can almost see the sweat beginning to run down his brow as he thinks about the consequences of taking on the land and Ruth. Marrying Ruth would probably result in a child or even children. The land and its ownership would then revert back to Elimelech's family. Rather than being a big, juicy investment in himself and in his future children, it suddenly becomes a charity case that is going to cost him money he won't get back, and would certainly have added the responsibility of taking care of Ruth and Naomi and any children that would be born, costing him even more. Not to mention, it might be a bit awkward to bring home wife number 2. The relative realizes this in an instant, and instead of fulfilling his obligations and responsibilities, he gives up all his rights, and he allows Boaz to take on what he sees as a burden. He adds a note of finality to this by taking off his sandal. Now, you see, land was measured in those days by the number of steps or sandals you could walk in a day, week, or month. Have a look at 1 Kings 21 verses 16 to 17 for some further details. So the sandal became an important symbol of land ownership. By taking off his sandal, he was showing to everyone that this was a serious and final decision. "Thank you very much," he says, "but I am out." Verses 9 to 12, you can almost hear the sigh of relief from Ruth and Naomi. Boaz is quick to follow up this decision by ratifying the decision made. The scene reminded me of the moment when I got married and the pastor said, Is there any reason why we should not get married? And there was a pause that seemed to last forever to allow for any objections. With this relative saying no objections, Boaz is quick to sign off the decision. Let's read in verses 9 to 12. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have brought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are my witnesses." In verse 9 and 10, Boaz declares legally that this is what he wants to do. It's his decision, and he is overjoyed with it, legally sealing the transaction, that he would redeem both the property and the future of Elimelech's family. And best of all, he gets to take Ruth, the woman he loves, as his wife. This moment reminds of how things were back in chapter 1. Ruth seemed to be giving up her best chance of marriage by leaving her native land of Moab and giving her heart and life to the God of Israel. But as Ruth had put God first, he now brings her together in a relationship greater than she could have ever imagined. This is a gentle reminder to us that when we exercise faith and put God first in our lives, we are always rewarded. Hebrews 11 verse 6 tells us, "And without faith it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those that earnestly seek him." Now, I love the way that Boaz is so open in his love for Ruth. He declares his love in front of a host of witnesses and before God. God has not richly blessed him. His life is overflowing with kindness and compassion. When they both thought everything was over and hope was gone, God steps in and breathes fresh life and purpose into their lives. And Boaz wants the whole world to know about it. Boaz calls out, "Today you are my witnesses." And the townspeople who are watching the scene unfold respond with a powerful blessing over their lives. Read with me verses 11 and 12. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So there's three aspects to this final blessing that they pray over Ruth and Boaz. Firstly, it's a blessing of fruitfulness. These two women, Rachel and Leah, had 13 children between them and were the mothers of the whole nation of Israel. This was a big blessing to pray over Boaz and Ruth. It was another way of asking God that every area of their lives would be fruitful and blessed, full of good things. Secondly, it was a blessing of favor. The blessing goes on to ask that God would give Boaz and Ruth continued success, and that whenever their names were mentioned, it would bring to mind words like noble, honorable, full of integrity. It was a prayer that their character would continue to be shaped by God, and that this in turn would be a blessing, both on the community and on the town and in generations to come. Finally, it was a blessing of fame. The final part of the blessing is fulfilled by us reading about them today. Ruth is one of the 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, and she is famous. We continue to read and be impacted by her story of kindness, redemption, and compassion. And we too are encouraged to put our faith in God, who will graft us into his family, and that we too will receive and live out of this blessing. If you've been impacted by the journey of Ruth so far, then this prayer of blessing, spoken almost 3,000 years ago, is still being answered by God. What a powerful thing it is to pray a blessing over others. Join me in episode 2 as we move on to the epilogue for this wonderful story.